Hi, everybody. I'm Marcos Molitzis. I'm here with Carrie Alavell. This is Daily Kos The Brief, our weekly show about politics. I am Carrie. I'm excited about today's show. We've been sort of teasing this for a couple of weeks, and it's finally here. We're going to be talking about the Republican message. It used to be about smaller taxes, less government, and family values, strong national security. And with Trump, right, family values out the door. Strong national security. They're like rooting for Putin to win in Ukraine. Um, they still like smaller taxes, I guess, but I don't even think Donald Trump cares about that. It's become a weird sort of something different. They even gave up their freedom message, right? And the Democrats have sort of adopted it, right? Because they're not trying to tell companies what they can do, if they can have DEI or not, who they can market to. It's become what books people can read, right? This is not the party of freedom anymore. So what has it become? And I didn't think there was a unifying message until I talked to Patrick Gaspard, who's going to be our guest today. I met him at an event. He is the current head of the Center for American Progress. He's a former U.S. ambassador. He is formerly at SCIU, which he has told me is some of his proudest work he has ever done. Patrick is joining us today to talk about that Republican message. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us.
Marcos, thank you so very much for having me on. I'm really thrilled.
Yeah, like I was saying, I did not understand what the Republicans were doing, what Trump was doing until we met at this event. And it sort of crystallized it. And so I'm really excited to have you here on the show to talk about that, so everybody else gets some of that wisdom of yours. So Carrie asked Walter to cue up this clip. This has become infamous at this point, this moment in Trump's campaign, and it's become a bit of a big dumpster fire for the Trump campaign having to deal with this. But it actually, I think, really speaks to what Patrick's going to be talking about on this show. So, Walter, if you can roll that clip and we can get...
If I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole... That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it. If this election isn't won, I'm not sure that you'll ever have another election in this country. Does that make sense? I don't think you're going to have another election in this country. If we don't win this election, I don't think you're going to have another election, or certainly not an election that's meaningful. And we better get out, or we better... I actually say that the date, remember this, November 5th, I believe it's going to be the most important date in the history of our country. I believe that.
Oh, man.
I don't disagree with him there.
we're radically aligned on that point.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So Patrick, I think this is a great sort of jumping off point to talk about your sort of operating theory, where the Republican message has gone. And so, what is your reaction to that video, and how does that tie into that broader theory?
Well, I'm so excited to kind of dig into this with you, but I want to just pause for a second and just acknowledge something that as progressives we don't always acknowledge about Donald Trump. That man has a powerful negative charisma, right? It's kind of like a heliotrope where we all have to lean that way and look at it. We want to turn away, but we can't turn away. That's a thing that we should not underestimate in the broader cultural ethos that we're kind of operating in. That's one thing. And the second thing is, just listening to him there, I was counting the number of times he used the first person pronoun. I used it, I think, a dozen times in that very, very short clip. There's a way that we've moved, if I'm just talking about Republicans, we've moved away from the Ronald Reagan we to a very determined Donald Trump I. In this era that we live in, where we're living in these bubbles of algorithmic personalization, and we're also in this age that we've moved, Marcos and Kerry, from the era of aspiration to the era of anxiety. I remember when I worked on Obama's campaign in 2008 and we reelected him in 12, definitely the age of aspiration in this country. By the time 2016 rolls around, we've gone through the Great Recession. We've had a very, very slow economic recovery, and all of these really hard and fast cultural fissures have formed in the country. You can see these demographic cleavages that are incredibly difficult to bridge, and we're in the age of anxiety. Donald Trump is a savant, both of the spiritual malaise that we're faced with in the country, but the new media ecosystem that we're operating in as well. And he brings it all together in a way that's moved the Republican messaging from, as you said, that framework of freedom that they used to really hold fast to now a different thing that ladders up to a security message. Everything that they're litigating in the campaign all runs through a prism of security, economic security, personal security, and cultural security. That last little bit, I think, is the most important thing that animates all of this, but it's kind of incoherent except for these moments when he says the quiet part out loud and says, it's going to be a bloodbath if I don't win. I know they've been trying to course correct and say that it's about the economics, the auto industry, but at the end of the day, there is a powerful violence that really motivates all of his rhetoric and drives that core constituency, that 1/3 of that party that's immovable from Donald Trump, and the broader message of economic security, personal security, that at the end of the day hangs on cultural security. A lot more I want to say about that last little bit, but I want to, kind of go back and forth with you.
Let me just jump in here and sort of piggyback off that, because I know there was a lot of debate. I mean, Trump did precede those bloodbath comments with talking about the auto industry and him putting tariffs on, job stuff coming from overseas and not shipping jobs out and stuff like that. But I have to say, it was really clear to me, because I wrote it up, that he has this way of conflating messages, conflating what he's talking about. So he was talking about the auto industry, but all of a sudden he starts talking about the bloodbath, and it's going to be the least of it. And, it's really clear that there's this apocalyptic message that he's playing on. And it's not, and it becomes broad, right? The part about the auto industry recedes into the background as he talks about the bloodbath, and it'll be the least of it and all that stuff. And it's perfectly in line with what he's been talking about during his campaign so far, which is that he's already promised that there would be, quote unquote, bedlam in the streets if he doesn't get elected. He's already talked about how the stock market will crash if he doesn't get elected. So it's this constant, it's not like, oh, he had this one-off, off message point about a bloodbath. He's constantly talking, to your point, Patrick, about this apocalyptic coming into being if he isn't elected. It's going to be the last election, all that. So I just wanted to make the point that, this is just par for the course for him.
Oh, it is. And let's also understand one other thing. Donald Trump is never actually off message, right? There's not one consistent message. It's almost as if every time he stands in front of an audience, we're part of a broad focus group. He'll throw things out there and he'll try to figure out what sticks against the wall, what gets the applause line like a cheap entertainer, and he'll just go back consistently to those things. And he knows that when he uses language like that, when he uses things that have the ability to go viral, that only accrues to his benefit with the audience that's in front of him and the broader MAGA audience that he's trying to stay in conversation with. It's been interesting going back and reading some of the things that were leaked out by Maggie Haberman and all these other folks when they were doing the analysis after Trump lost. And the one thing that comes through over and over and over again, Donald Trump kept telling those close to him, family members, advisors, which are one and the same, that he felt that he was forced to get away from his core, from his base. And he promised that he would never do that again. He knows what he's doing when he throws out things like bloodbath. He knows that folks like us are going to get all wigged out about it. And he knows it's going to actually put more points on the board on X, on Instagram, on Facebook, etc., which is really the thing that holds his broad community together. So it's not off message. And the Donald Trump who stands there and says it's going to be a bloodbath is the same Donald Trump who stood in front of CPAC and said to them, "I am your justice. I am your retribution." Right. So there's this whole sense. Yeah, it's kind of it's perfect fascism. If not for me, I embody the state. If not for me, you're going to have disaster on your hands. And again, it plays into that broad security framework, which at the end of the day is a cultural appeal. Marcos, when you and I had the conversation that we had some months back, we were in Denver. We're in Denver, Colorado. Remember just talking about the demographic shifts in the country. I remember back in 2010 when the decennial census came out, and it was announced and projected that by 2040 we would be a majority minority country. There were some folk in our community who were saying, "Hey, demographics is destiny. This means a kind of pluralism in the country and a locked-in liberal to progressive future in a number of states." But there were many other people who heard that and received it with consternation, particularly at a time when you had, as I said before, this dragging recovery. You have your first African-American president sitting in the White House. There are all these other cultural norms that are shifting with gay marriage, all these things that are kind of in the ether all at the same time that you're projecting majority minority status in a few short decades. Donald Trump, before he announced for president, remember, he gets the 2012 Republican analysis that they've got to figure out a way to have conversations with African Americans, with Latinos, to open up and broaden their tent. And he said, no, that's wrong, that there are disaffected white voters who we need to appeal to widen the pie in the electorate. And, to his strategic credit, he proved that that was the case in 2016. And came darn near close to proving it again in 2020. There is this profound cultural anxiety that existed at this moment in America, where the old ways are dying, the new ways are coming in, majority minority status. You're going to have in 2040 for the first time more people over the age of 64 than under the age of 20. You're going to have more practitioners of the Muslim faith than the Jewish faith in America at that time. And the U.S. will have lost its per capita GDP race to India and China by 2040. So all of this internal instability, a sense that we're losing our edge, our competitiveness, and in cities like Des Moines, Iowa, the majority of school children right now in classrooms are already majority minority in Des Moines, Iowa. So all of this social dislocation,
which is like 88% white. The state is like 88% white.
So. Correct, 88% white, but the majority of public school kids are majority minority already. So folks are feeling these tensions at a time when they're feeling unsure about their own space in society. And Donald Trump, who has magnified that party, is just phenomenal at converting it from a freedom ethos to a security ethos. And if not for me, then it's all lost.
Yeah, that security.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So you talk about economic security, and I think that manifests itself as inflation. You're losing jobs overseas, whatever, even though his hats are made in China. People don't care. The personal security, obviously, crime, the border plays into that. It's a big piece. The hordes, the invasion, your personal security. I found cultural security to be the most fascinating piece because I never understood. I got why they were going after immigration, why they were going after inflation. That made sense. I never understood this obsession with Dr. Seuss or with Taylor Swift, and really. You speak and you just spoke, at length about that. But even the trite things, and in fact, you talk about these really serious issues, that sort of demographic transformation of our country. But that's almost too abstract or too heavy for people. So it's Dr. Seuss being canceled because, or it's and is that what's happening? Is that why they sort of focus on these ridiculous things like the Bud Light fiasco because they had an Instagram story with a trans activist? I mean, is that what's going on?
Yeah, it is. That's 100% what's going on there. I mean, go back to the contest that Glenn Youngkin was in for governor of Virginia against Terry McAuliffe some years back, right? We all remember that in the waning days of that election, suddenly Americans were being introduced to this concept of critical race theory that nobody had ever heard of, not being taught in any curriculum anywhere in America, certainly not in Virginia. but it became the defining thing in that contest. Why is that? Glenn Youngkin understood that the only way that he could peel enough votes, because remember, Virginia had gone kind of bluish, right, in the presidential level and at the state level. Only way that he could kind of peel those suburban votes back from Terry McAuliffe was to create some anxiety that he could exploit. We're coming out of COVID. There was a sense that parents, particularly suburban parents in Virginia, had that they had lost some measure of control, some measure of agency in this huge bureaucratic system. And he and those around him were able to kind of insert this notion that not only have you lost administrative agency, you've actually lost your primacy in the space. You've lost cultural relevance in the space, and they are teaching a thing to your children that will alienate your children from you, and you've got to take your power back. And it worked. It worked. It jumped off the Richter scale for them in all of their testing, and we've seen that replicated obviously in Florida and in so many other parts of red to purplish America, and places that they're trying to contest, like in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, etc. So the little things are the big things. And there's a reason why, remember, for a very long time, you would have thought that there were 10,000 transgender swimmers who were competing in like every pool in America.
Taking over the sport, Patrick. Taking it over.
Like it's done. It's done, right? It's done. That's all that they threw out. And guess what? Guess why it works for them? Like 5-year-olds on a soccer field, every single time any one of them in any corner of America launched an attack against this one really like courageous young person who was trying to give expression to who they were in the world, all of us would jump at the soccer ball, all of us on the field at the same time. There's interesting research that we conducted at the Center for American Progress, where we took all of this communication from Democrats in the run-up to the 2022 midterm elections for a full year, looked at all this stuff to see the percentage of times that people were talking about the economy. This is Democrats in the House, Democrats in the Senate, and it was in single digits. But the percentage of time that we spent responding to the kind of stuff that Ron DeSantis and Glenn Youngkin were throwing at us was in the very high double digits. We paired that with all of this polling that demonstrated that for the overwhelming majority of Republicans, for a plurality of independents, and for half of Democrats, they believed that Democrats were not paying enough attention to the economy, but instead were being culture warriors, which of course, was a complete flip of what the reality was in terms of the policies being passed by Democrats on the Hill versus the kind of culture wars being lifted by Republicans. But every small bore thing that they threw out there, we leapt at it, and it was definitional. So yeah, the small things are the point for them, and they're literally trying to bait us into that contest because they can't actually have a fair fight on the economy. They can't actually have a fair fight on security. They can't even unify to pass the border bill that they themselves said they wanted. They're going to stay in the space of rhetoric, stay in the space of culture, and unfortunately, it does work for them on social media and the rest of the politics.
I want to make one important point, which is I totally agree with you that it takes Democrats off message when they're throwing out this red meat sort of chum on things like transgender issues and whatever. But I want to be clear too, that even though it takes us off message, it didn't actually work in the midterms, right? I mean, Democrats did far better in the midterms than, and every time Republicans have sought to make, the transgender issue kind of works for them in the scope of the frame of a larger conversation about how the culture is changing and things like that, right? But on its own, it's not moving voters, right? The suburban women who are going to bed at night right now are much more worried about book bans than they are, which is what we found out, in subsequent elections, than they are about that one transgender athlete in, I don't know, Mississippi or whatever, right?
You stole my punchline, Carrie. That's where I'm going.
Damn you, Carrie.
Sorry.
That's actually where I was going with the
I'm
story.
muting now. I'm going to mute.
No, don't mute. This is good. This is good. We have a Vulcan mind meld. That is a good thing for those
I like it.
out there.
I like it. Bring in the Trek. Bring in the Trekkie.
I would say it this way, Carrie. I'd say that it only pulls us, quote, off message if we don't marshal our defense in the space of freedom, right? They've abandoned the freedom flagpole. We should grab hold of the freedom flagpole in every instance. So when we talk about that young swimmer, we got to bring the issue back broadly to freedom, yes, to bodily autonomy, and the fact that conservatives, MAGA, claim they want small government out of our lives, and instead they are injecting government at every turn, our local swimming pool, etc., at every turn, right? So take the freedom mantle back from them, I think keeps us on message, Carrie. But I'd also remind us that, it's really easy to underestimate the power of what they're putting out there. Let's be honest about it. Abortion, that elite, from the Alito leak on the Dobbs ruling to now, we've won 9 out of 10 elections that have been litigated in this country, right? And that's so that a lot of that has to do with abortion. A lot of that definitely has to do with overreach by them on culture. And Carrie, you are spot on about the book bannings, right? There was a moment when I would say Republicans had a kind of an edge on the education debate and how they were steering it into this cultural space. But then they had, this extraordinary overreach where it was one book banning after another. And all of the data shows that particularly those voters, independent women in the suburbs, that they really need to borrow back if they're going to be successful in the election or repulsed by that. So, Carrie, you said it far better than I could.
Well, I said it with less detail than you did, but I don't know that I said it better. So I appreciate you backing up my point with some data points. That's helpful.
So, Patrick, you mentioned how, and I mentioned at the beginning, that Republicans abandoned the freedom message. You just sort of reinforced that notion. Why? It's such a good message. They owned it. They gave it to us on a silver platter, and I still can't fathom why they would be that stupid.
So this is a powerful question, Marcos. But clearly, they have the evidence in 2016 when no one believed that candidate, that character, was going to be the Republican nominee, let alone the president of the United States. They have like this powerful evidence that there is something about that message that can gain a purchase in an electorate that have basically been turned off by them. Because not only are we in this age of anxiety, we're in this profound era of skepticism about institutions. Yeah. And the Republican Party brand was in the toilet before it was resurrected by Donald Trump in corners of America, rural corners of America, and suburban corners of America, that felt as if the conversation had moved away from them. They were not included in this new America that was emerging. And it was also at a time when we all went mobile. And we were all being governed by algorithms in ways that we did not quite yet appreciate about these platforms. And these new tools of ignorance that we have are really driven by heat, by the energy of anger, and the energy of a kind of victimization, a kind of grievance politics that he mastered and that he was able to pick up as this kind of sub rosa thing in the culture that's now become the thing in the culture. So you're right, Marcos. It doesn't make sense to have abandoned the freedom flag for the security flag unless you are feeling from your constituents the social isolation, the depression, the sense that things are not going to be better for my kids than they were for me. Do I have time to tell you a very quick anecdote that for me?
We have time. If you have time, we have time.
I do. Let me tell you the story. Something I experienced in 2012 that stays with me all the time. I'm always thinking about this person, this voter, and how it talks about the shift that we just had from the age of aspiration to anxiety, the skepticism about institutions. So 2012, working on President Obama's re-election campaign, we're about 2 weeks out from Election Day. we got this thing won. We've convinced everybody that Mitt Romney's the guy who gives out the pink slips in the factory. Nobody wants to be his friend.
Yeah.
We're gonna win. And so I decide I'm not gonna hang out in Chicago at the national headquarters. I want to get on the ground, knock on doors, rally people. So I go to Ohio, which used to be a battleground state, and I'm like, and the campaign hires a car and driver to take me around city to city, town to town, going to union halls, etc. Being driven by a white man who's in like late middle age, right? And he and I are together for a couple of days, and we're bonding as we're like getting around. He starts coming into my events. I go into a hall and I talk about the economy, how it's turned around. I get back in the car and he says to me, I'm on both sides of your presentation. I say, what do you mean? He said, you showed all the jobs that were lost before Obama took office and all the jobs that have been gained now. I was on the losing edge. I never went to college, went to the military, learned mechanical engineering, started to work at a plastics factory in Ohio. It shut down during the downturn, went south. I lost my job. My son lost his job. It's depressing. But now I have a job. So I'm on the side where you're showing how in the Obama economy, there's been an upturn. And then he turns and looks at me and he says, but you know what my job is now? I'm driving you. And he says it with like that emphasis. He like kind of jabs his finger at me. So there's like this interesting thing. This older white man. He's, we're in the Midwest, and he was part of the industrial economy that's become the service economy and the information economy and the gig economy. And now he's just driving. So he's saying to me in that one instance, I've lost my dignity. I've lost my sense of self and culture. I'm confident that man voted for Obama in 2008. I'm confident he voted for us in 2012 versus the plutocrat Mitt Romney. But I'm also confident he voted for Donald Trump against Hillary Clinton. And maybe we borrowed him back in 2020 following the pandemic, etc. But Donald Trump understands that man is convinced that his son is going to lose his place in the line in Ohio, right? Donald Trump gets that. To answer your question, Marcos, why they've turned to the security framework, it's because that voter and that voter's son, they've turned into Linus from the Peanuts, where they've got that blanket, they're holding on to it, and they believe that both Democrats and Republicans are going to come and yank that blanket away from them. They don't trust the institutional players and actors. But this guy who says, hey, I get it, and it's insane. You've lost everything. And if I don't get elected again, it's going to be a bloodbath for you all. Yeah, it is. It's a bloodbath out here. We got to stop this shift in the culture.
Marcos, do I have time to just make one piggyback off that for 1 second?
You do actually have time. We're actually on time.
It's such a long story, but that guy stays with me.
Oh, absolutely. No. It's such a powerful story.
You'll have a time to ask your question, but it also puts the bloodbath in a different context too. Like, we're all thinking he's thinking violence. It's more of that same. I mean, for him, the bloodbath is that economic.
100%.
Yeah.
But you can't separate the economic from the cultural, because there's a way that all of the Supreme Court rulings and things like affirmative action, the way we are in a contest around diversity and inclusion, all these things are part of the big overstory that Donald Trump is communicating in his way with that bloodbath language to those voters. Look at how much you've lost already. Imagine what happens if this ticket with a Kamala Harris on it gets reelected. It's not going your way, people, and it's not going to go your way unless you do something drastic and radical. And I represent that drastic and radical thing that you're going to have to swallow hard and do if you want to protect yourself and your culture.
I think what's so counterintuitive about this for a lot of us who aren't Trump voters and who see him as a total demagogue and an authoritarian, autocrat, etc., is that he is running we see him as the chaos candidate, right? He's constantly talking about chaos and almost willing it into being. Talking about how if he loses, there will be bedlam in the streets, and talking about the, bloodbath, whether that's real violence or economic violence. He comes across to people who are not part of the MAGA movement as being the ultimate chaos candidate. But what he's doing is he is basically talking about the chaos they are already experiencing. He's feeling and emoting the chaos they are already experiencing, his voters in their lives.
Yes.
And then he's sort of willing it into being and essentially saying, I alone can fix it, right? And that's how he becomes the security candidate when so many of us who aren't part of his, his cult, his following, see him as the chaos candidate. And it's super counterintuitive for us. It's very difficult to understand. And I think that's why Marcos was saying that his conversation with you a while back was so revelatory for him in terms of being able to view this through a different prism.
I think that you're spot on, Carrie, and it's not dissimilar to the Bolsonaro phenomena in Brazil or the Viktor Orban phenomena. And there's a reason why, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants always end up with one another, hanging out in Mar-a-Lago and other places. There's a kinship that exists there around a kind of strongman politics, and a sense that the language of destruction that they use that puts people like us on our heels is actually affirming. It's an affirmation for folks who feel all of this stuff already in their lives in some way, right? Remember what's the line that we all remember from his inauguration in 2016? It's the American Carnage line. People believe that in some fashion, they recognize it in their lives, right? And I keep going back to this era of hyper personalized algorithms, this house of mirrors, which is really a house of horrors that we're all living in. Folks are getting that kind of affirmation constantly. Facebook was so much more important than Fox News for the election of Donald Trump, because it gave this mirroring amplification to my sense of isolation, my sense that something has been lost, my sense that community has been irreparably destroyed. And the people who I'm seeing and hearing who are at the edges of my community now, they don't look like me, they don't sound like me, and I can be easily convinced that they don't share the same Americanness that I have. This is not the way we talked about immigrants in the past, where there was a sense of like profound integration that was always possible in America. Now there's a sense of alienation. Some of us belong, and some of us are disrupting and destroying a thing. And then you layer on top of that a thing that I'm going to bring my friend Senator Sanders into this. But look at the language being used by Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump in 2016. That was in a kind of alignment where both of these actors were powerful politically. Were both saying the system is rigged against you. And there were people, I remember watching folks who were going in to vote in New Hampshire, where it's open primary, you could decide who you're going to, and they were trying to decide if they were going to go and participate in primary for Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders. These two things could not be more unalike, but both of them were saying there's chaos in America. Something is rigged against you, and only if you go through this door are we going to be able to fix the chaos. It's kind of interesting.
So we are technically out of time, but do you have a few minutes? I have one more question. I'm curious what you think about Senator Katie Britt's response to the State of the Union address and how it sort of fits into that rubric. And we all laughed at it, but we're all liberals, right? It became a meme. Do you think it had resonance on their side, or was her delivery just overstepped the actual message itself? I'm curious what you think, because it was so funny.
It was classic. It's going to live forever, and we all made all the Handmaid's Tale jokes. But here's the thing. All that mattered was about 20 seconds of her delivery. 20 seconds of Katie Britt sitting in that kitchen with that very prominent display of the cross, and her saying, these other people are crazy. They are crazy, and they're going to destroy everything that matters to you. And that's why I'm coming to you in this way from my kitchen. So we can all poke fun at it, and we will make jokes endlessly about Katie Britt. But Katie Britt is a perfect stand-in for this moment, and there are so many Katie Brits who are going to be delivering that message for them every step of the way from now to election day. I think they lose, right? I think they lose in the presidency, despite the advantage they have in the electoral college. I think that they lose the House. The Senate is difficult. We'll see what emerges from Ohio in the Republican primary contest. Senate's a challenge, but as Kerry said earlier, there's a way that this bunch constantly overreaches. So every time they overreach, they foreclose opportunities for themselves in the general election environment. But let's not underestimate the power of Katie Britt and this sense that, hey, there's chaos outside of these kitchen walls. Come gather with me here, and let's have a common project that is going to secure your American future. Not their American future, but your American future.
Yeah, it's so true. And I will say too, though, to your point, what she did was reaffirm what people were thinking who were already with them. It's doubtful that she brought in any new people. Okay.
Yes.
If anyone who sat and listened to her for more than that 20 seconds, right, who was, I don't know, independent, maybe a swingish voter or whatever, I don't think they looked at Katie Britt and thought, you know what, she's really tuning into what I'm saying. It was more of an affirmation of what the people who were already with them believed than it was a good mechanism for bringing in new people to the coalition.
And that's their project. Reince Priebus in 2012 told them, we got to bring new people in. And they said, no, we don't. We have loads of disaffected folk who can be tapped into if we talk to them where they are about their disaffection, about their anger, and if we use that in ways that are electorally strategic. And they've managed to do that at the presidential level. It hurt them in 2018, 2020, 2022 at the congressional and Senate level. And I'm confident it's going to hurt them again this time. But don't underestimate the power of that at the presidential level with their electoral college advantage. There's a lot of work to be done.
Patrick Gaspard is the president, right? You're the president of Center for American Progress. Thank you so much for joining us. This was incredibly illuminating and informative conversations. Really glad to have had you out.
Love talking to both of you. Thank you for the kind words, and thank you for the leadership that you guys show in your show. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, Kerry, did he deliver what I promised?
Oh, yeah. No, I think it's fascinating. And like I said, it's really counterintuitive. So it's hard to grasp. Like, how can this guy who's promising chaos be the security candidate? I mean, I think that's what's hard to put into focus. What I will say, and something we should probably try to tackle in an upcoming show, is it's really clear that that Trump and his allies on all levels are not trying to bring back like the suburban voters that they've lost and whatever. They're happy to, go take a hike to the Haley voters and all that stuff, right? But I do think what they think they're doing, and it remains to be seen if they're at all successful is that they're bringing in working class people of color voters. Okay. That's what they think they're doing. They're getting rid of the suburban voters. They've said sayonara to them, and those that have already gone, they're gone. And what we're going to do is refill some of some of what we've lost with working class Hispanic and Black voters who buy into, the message that they've been left behind and whatever. And it seems unfathomable, to be honest. I have a hard time wrapping my mind around it, but I've heard conservative commentators saying this is exactly what they're doing and what they think they're doing. And I think we should spend a little time seeing if they're actually going to be able to do that, or if there's signs that they're actually managing to do that, as in previous elections and polling, et cetera.
Sounds like a plan. Kerry, thank you so much. Always such a pleasure. Thanks to Patrick Gaspard at the Center for American Progress for being our incredibly insightful guest today. Thanks to Walter for producing. Thanks to everybody who helps behind the scenes for the show. Perry and Perry, who helps with social media. And thank you, the viewer, listener, reader, for being part of our effort to protect our democracy. It is, once again, the most important election in our lifetime. There's no hyperbole in that, because it is Donald Trump literally is a threat to our democracy. So glad to have you guys along for this fight. Thank you so much. Catch you all next week.